On this week's episode of the Jesse T Show, the amazing, mighty, and powerful Nathan Kohlerman, founder of NeuIntention Health and Wellness. Nathan, brother, great to have you, man.
Thank you, man. Thank you so much for having me.
Man, I love it. I love that we connected, and there's a lot that we resonate on in different aspects, from spirituality to business to health and wellness to some of our background is very similar with some of the demons we faced and overcame in military. And so I know you're doing great things in a lot of great spaces outside of being an amazing human being. And I think also a Lululemon model. Is that
Lululemon ambassador? But I mean, man, they put my photo right up next to the underwear, so you might as well call me a model now. I mean,
yeah. So famous going to be the next big thing there, and just building a great awareness and a great community. I wanted to connect with you and have everybody hear a little bit more about your journey. So if you want to tell the world about Nathan Kohlerman, go for it, man.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
So yeah, man, I guess where my journey started, being an athlete, started at mixed martial arts about 5 years old, American Kempo specifically, and kind of graduated and started getting thrown some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and some Muay Thai thrown in there. I had this, jack of all trades, Sifu, so that was a plus. And I gravitated towards the martial arts, not only because my parents threw me into it, but because I was bullied, I was picked on, I never really felt accepted. So moving through school, and that's really all I had to keep me going. And during that time and being in a home full of chaos, I've seen, I saw the abuse, I saw a lot of the things that a lot of quote unquote normal houses don't see, when it comes to like seeing their parents like going at each other and trying to like hide in a corner, and never really being able to fully express myself is really what created now the vulnerability that I love to share now. So moving through that time, fast forward through the trauma, fast forward through the chaos, fast forward through the, bullying and being picked on and not belonging, and leading up into high school, parents got divorced. I blame myself heavily for the divorce. Ended up, seeking validation in a lot of different ways, specifically women. That was a big thing for me. I've literally had girlfriends ever since I was 14 years old, back to back to back to back to back to back to back. So that's been an interesting journey, which we'll talk about later on, I'm sure. And I was also really indulging in fighting. Like that was what I did. I didn't play football and I didn't wrestle because I enjoyed the sport. Like in looking back at it now, like I really played those sports to like hurt people because I was hurting, and I was projecting that outwardly so much. And eventually that took me along the path of getting mixed into the wrong crowds, doing the wrong things. And that's when a group of individuals had seen my potential to use me in certain ways. So they ended up, quote unquote, jumping me in to their crew. And that's what I did for a good amount of time, ever since from 15 up until the time I left to the Army. But during that time, I started indulging in drugs, alcohol, started drinking at like 15, started smoking cigarettes at 14, started going into marijuana, cocaine, ecstasy, selling ecstasy, until eventually I came upon the path of heroin. And that's where, the last year and a half or so of my life kind of became a blur, and that's where a lot of things had happened. And I suppressed those things for so many years. And looking back, it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, which I'll kind of open that can later on. But it came to a point where it was about December of 2009, where my mom and my sister sat me down because I'd reached out for my sister for some help. And they told me that if I kept going down the path that I went on, I'd be in jail or I'd wind up dead. So the next week later, showed up to school. It was a really small school, graduated with like 30 people because it was an alternative school for people who were essentially not cut for normal schools. It was Accelerated Learning Center, ALC, what we called Asshole's Last Chance, because it really was. So walked into school that week and there were Army recruiters standing right up front. And I took that as my message. I took that as my sign. And before I knew it, I was talking to them. I was getting in the process, and I ended up getting sober from heroin.
Oh yeah.
It'll be, coming on 10 years here pretty soon. And I left for the military August 2010. So went in the military, got demoted within 7 weeks for disrespecting a senior drill sergeant. I
In
learned
boot
really
camp,
quick.
you were in boot camp, right? Was that when that happened? Yeah.
Yeah. So I learned really quick of what not to do and
Yeah.
how I was not back on the block. It's exactly word for word what they would say. And got through that experience, went through my training. I was a Patriot Missile System Enhanced Operator Maintainer, basically just a fancy way of saying I started up the missile system and powered it down. I moved it, transported it, loaded missiles, unloaded missiles, a little bit more of the logistics category than anything.
Yep.
And went to Korea for a year, ended up getting into a fight on my 19th birthday, which really, opened my eyes to like, I can't just fight anybody anymore. That's the last time I've ever actually put my hands on anybody. Thank God. So once I got in trouble, this kind of segues into how I got to where I am now. And the only thing, when I got in trouble, they said the only things you can do is you can go to the gym, you can go to the chow hall, and go to church. And I wasn't religious, so I literally started working out and I started eating a lot. Because I went into the army, as a small little addict. Like I was maybe 150, 160 pounds. And that's where I really found health, wellness, and fitness and working out was my new addiction. And I immediately just fell in love with it. And, that's when I really started noticing a change in my behavior. I started noticing a change in my positivity, my mood, my energy, and just my overall desire to be better. So fast forward to that time, I ended up getting married in Korea at 19 at the Korean embassy to another soldier. We ended up getting her orders changed so she could come to Fort Sill with me. And March 26, 2013, my beautiful daughter was born. And that changed everything. I had a huge chip on my shoulder. And the minute she came out, man, it was like nothing else mattered at all. And 4 days later, made my sergeant, went through the rest of the duration of my military career, deployed 2013, where I got heavily into bodybuilding. And that's, where the health and fitness kind of segued into bodybuilding. And I started forming this new identity within the military to where once I got out, it just completely tore apart my marriage, the relationship I was in. And I ended up getting a divorce. So my daughter's now in New Mexico. I'm here in Arizona. And immediately after her, I went right into another relationship, and that's my son's mom. So, going from relationship to identity, that's been the trend here. So moving forward and looking at the military career, they ended up finding out that I had bilateral exertional compartment syndrome in both my legs, which is essentially just a myofascial disorder where it just causes a lot of restriction, a lot of pressure, and it traps toxins. And it was to the point where I'd start running, and my legs would go numb. And it felt like there were literally axes going into my shins. It was like shin splints on steroids. So I ended up taking a medical discharge after the whole medical examination process and the med board process. They ended up deeming me 100% disabled, which mentally just messed with me because I thought I was broken. I thought that like something was wrong with me or I wasn't good enough and I wasn't strong enough to be in the military. So that had its toll. And, being a bodybuilder and getting out of the military, like the only thing I really knew how to do is like, all right, well, I'm going to be a personal trainer. So I started training for this corporate gym. And then July, right after I got out, my son was born. So being heavily into bodybuilding, having all these different emotional issues and mental health issues, like all the way from my youth up until this point, really brought me to a place where I started self-sabotaging the relationship then, and then Thanksgiving, after he was born, 3 to 4 months old, me and his mom ended up splitting and she moved back to New York where she was from. So now, backstory there, I have 2 children, 6-year-old daughter, she's in New Mexico, and then I have a 3-year-old son in New York. So, which is a completely different battle of its own. And that's why I really do what I do. They're my why. They are literally the reason why I do everything day in, day out. So once they left, I dove all the way into my career, started learning as much as I could about corrective exercise and personal training until about a year into this personal training job, leaned on a granite counter, it snapped off, tore my whole hand open. So I ended up tearing four of my flexor tendons. I severed my radial artery, my median nerve. And that was mainly due to the counter being improperly installed. So I ended up proceeding with litigation, and then they turned around and fired me,
Of course.
which, yeah, which then propelled me on the path of starting my business, which originally it was New Life, which I have, formerly rebranded it to NeuIntention. And that's how NeuIntention Health and Wellness was born. And after that hand injury, it was like everything was taken from me. I had such a victim mentality. I looked at everything just like, wow, this is what I deserve. This is everything that I've done in my life, and all this karma is coming back to get me. And now I can't do bodybuilding. Now I can't do powerlifting. Now I'm not going to be a personal trainer anymore. And I was in a time of crisis where I was like, what the fuck do I do? You know? And I guess the most groundbreaking point was, I was brushing my teeth with my left hand because I had to learn how to do everything with my non-dominant hand. And I just dropped it. And I just like collapsed crying. I was 240, 250 pounds at the time. And I kind of asked myself, like, how could somebody so big and so strong be so weak and so useless? And that was the last time I had thought about like killing myself, contemplating suicide and thinking that I didn't fulfill a purpose. And what stopped me from that was, again, my children, and seeing that they needed their father. So I needed to do something about it. And that's when I started looking into transformational training. So I started with Landmark, which is a personal development program that's, I think, nationwide. And it was a good experience for me to actually see that everything that had happened in my life served a purpose. And me playing the victim mentality was showing up in so many different ways. And I was just creating so many different stories around things. And this is when I first started hearing the language of your stories and your rackets, and you are the creator of your own reality and all these things. And my mind was blown. So, I dove heavily into transformational training, which segued into me starting to teach these principles when I was training people and when I was coaching people, where I've always gone down the corrective exercise path and teaching people how to heal themselves through mobility and movement, and how to assess themselves and how to empower them with the tools to heal themselves. But, doing this 2.5 years now with my own brand, now I'm in a place where going through all the transformational training and investing in masterminds and doing work with Aubrey Marcus, and even looking at all the different layers that come with our health and come with our wellness, I created the tagline, redefining human optimization through mind, body, and soul. Because just in my experience, having a lot of mental and emotional trauma, and then going through injuries and disability and physical trauma, and then not only that, having all these identities crises where I didn't really know who I was, and having a spiritual disconnection for myself, I realized in all of these different moments that are chunked that our health and our wellness come in so many different ways, and it comes in a full circle, and it's built from several pillars. So now what I'm doing is I'm not only teaching people how to move and live better and live healthier lives, physically, but also how to create, psychological change over time, and how to change their unwanted behaviors and patterns and their habits, aka their addictions. So looking at my addiction and how to rewire that framework, but also looking at our behaviors and our addictions to our control, our addiction to our power, our addiction to overthinking, and teaching people to start changing their behaviors to be mentally healthy while being physically healthy. And then also incorporating different mindfulness practices that I have found personally to really heal themselves and find that connection within themselves again, where people can now get out of their head and into their body is where I'm at now and what I'm doing with NeuIntention.
Man, incredible journey, man. It's like it's something straight out of like a book or Hollywood, like not even a real story that you're able to. And what's freaky about it, as I lived through a lot of the same exact shit, it's almost like we're in a really weird way in different parts of the country. We like live the same stuff, from bullying to broken home to being around the wrong people to selling drugs to military saving our lives. In the military, starting off the same way where it wasn't, you got better as you went along, and then getting out of there and trying to find out your purpose and going through all these iterations and changes, man. There's so much to unpack there. So just kind of for context, with everything that you mentioned and all those topics, would you say that kind of, how old were you when you were getting bullied? And was it like a once in a while thing? Was it an everyday? Like, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first time I really feel like I was like being bullied, it wasn't like the bullied, like getting shoved in a locker kind of thing. It was more so like I was the last kid to get picked during kickball, or I was the kid that like nobody would really talk to. So I've always like was kind of the loner. But
Yep.
when the opportunity presented itself, I found that like I think it was third or fourth grade, so I think I was 8 or 9, and I remember this kid Sage, and he was much smaller than me, which is surprising because I was like one of the smallest in my class. But I remember like the only thing I was really proud about was like being able to run fast. And that was like how I compete. And like I did a lot of track, and like I did the 40-yard dash, and I was like super excited about it. And this kid was just so much faster. He was tiny, but he would like run circles around me, and all his little friends would like start laughing and picking. And that's kind of what it was. It was like, you're not good enough to keep up, or you're not that good. So, we're better than you, and we're younger than you too, like, so it was always this like knocking down this confidence layer where I never felt really good enough, or I never felt like I was the best, which of course translated over years.
Yeah.
But there was also certain times, I think in maybe like 6th grade, where, girls would prank call me. I still know all 3 of them by name to this day. And they'd call me and say, "You're really cute. We like you. We want to start seeing you. We want to start hanging out with you. We want to be your friend." And I'd be like, "Haha, just kidding. No, you're not." And it was like, wow, like I must not be handsome enough. I must not be like good looking, all these different things, and I would come home crying because I just didn't have any friends. I didn't have any community. I didn't have anybody like to really hang out with. And I just felt alone, so it like wasn't the typical shove you in the locker, or put your head in the toilet. I went to elementary school in Scottsdale, Arizona. Kids are harmless out here. Bunch of rich kids in Beamers.
Much different experience from mine growing up in the city of Boston, and I didn't get shoved into a locker because we didn't have any. But during that school, we had no lockers, and then I definitely caught a beating every day, like walking home, and it was weird because I never really was like hurt. Like I didn't catch a bloody nose. I didn't cry. And I'm not saying that to sound tough. It was just like, I feel like this kid like watched too much Karate Kid, and he was trying to practice his moves on me kind of thing as I would walk home. So I got the other side of it, which is the physical side. But either way, it's still traumatic as shit. And I actually didn't tell anyone about it for years. For years, I was shameful and embarrassed. I didn't want to share that story because in the town I grew up in, it was very like macho, who's the toughest guy kind of thing. And you don't talk about that sort of thing. So it's interesting to see the parallels of being bullied, but how different they can actually be in terms of psychological, societal pressure of, the pack mentality and people ganging up, and like these people behind your back going and like calling you and like coordinating, like, let's give this kid some shit. And like, the girls specifically, like what you said, call you up and like get you excited. And all of a sudden, like, you're like, "Oh, this is awesome. Like new girlfriend potential." And all of a sudden it's like, she's just fucking with you. And you're like, no. So like, that's a huge, huge scar on the mental and emotional psyche. And then I'm sure, when you mentioned everything that was going on at home, and the home front was, there was a schism and the family separated. There was just always this sense for like one of belonging and being a part of something. And it wasn't really there. And you're in the most impressionable time of your life. And I went through that too. And again, like you, I found the wrong people, and it went into recreational drug use, to selling drugs, to full-blown heroin addiction. And it's crazy because I'm sure what was your experience like when were you selling first and then doing? Were you doing it at the same time and then just doing? Like, how did your journey look?
Yeah, I mean, that was like definitely middlemaning, you know what I mean? Because it's like I was definitely doing it, but I would middleman it so that way I didn't have to pay for it. Because like my family didn't really have a lot of money when I was growing up, so it's like, going on, government funded school lunches, and applying for those things, and then because there was a lot of different financial issues for different reasons,
For sure.
whether it be, you know, gambling or bankruptcy or all these different things going on financially in my household.
Yep.
So like I learned at a really young age, like when I started showing up to high school and I was the only kid, like it felt like I was the only kid without like a car, you know, like all their
Like the
parents were
same
getting them
thing, man.
Beamers and Mustangs and, you know, in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I'm like, dang, dude, like that sucks,
Yep.
you know. But it's like I wasn't the only kid riding the school bus, you know what I'm saying? But like in my head conceptually, you know, I didn't have a lot for extra things. You know, I had enough to play sports, thank God,
Yeah.
because that did tremendous things for me mentally, just to have an outlet of some sort. But once I didn't have sports, it was all downhill. And
Teamwork, a place you could shine, a sense of belonging. And, you know, I'm sure there was some like idiosyncrasies within the team aspect, but now when you talk about, you know, using heroin, were you full blown shooting heroin, and how was that looking for you?
so I wasn't shooting it, I was smoking it.
Okay.
You know, smoking that, and then anytime I could get my hand on an oxy or a Percocet, like
Definitely.
that was
Yep.
it. You know, but the thing is, like that did not come cheap, and
Oh,
the only way I can afford it is like, hey guys, like I can get you it for this much money. So if you guys throw down this
broker
much,
the deal.
we can get
Yeah.
this many. You know what I'm saying? Which like now I'm great with sales, so I mean thanks, but you know I
Isn't
took
that
a lesson
crazy?
from it.
I went further down where I ended up because I started selling weed, and that wasn't a big deal. But my entrepreneurial spirit, because I've been an entrepreneur on and off my whole life. You know, buying, selling, trading comic books, baseball cards when I was a kid, shoveling snow for money in Boston. We used to go to the airport, and at the airport, I don't know if they still use these. I think they still do. I saw one not too long ago, but there's a thing called smart carts, and you used to put your luggage on them. And when you return them to the stall, you get a quarterback. And so we would find ways to make money. So that hustle was always there. Fast forward to my, you know, drug use days, which was about 2 years total time. I started off selling weed, and I was like having people sell for me because I didn't want to sell it. So it was like I would give them the weed, and they could either, you know, with the profits they made, smoke some for free, or they would, you know, whatever they did with the money. And I would just take the money back that they owed me. And then right around the early 2000s, before I joined the military, like you said, OxyContin was huge. And in Boston, you know, you were paying $1 per milligram. So it was super expensive. So for an 80, you were paying $80. And sometimes when it was super
Yeah.
hard to get, people were paying $100 plus for one pill. And essentially for people that don't know what this is, it's heroin in a pill is exactly what it is. The same exact thing. And so we used to have a connection down in Florida that would get them for like $30. And so if we could make $50 per pill, I mean, we were hand over fist doing, you know, very illegal, bad things. But that was my path too. And then eventually you know, I started doing them. I grew up with a heroin addicted dad. So I don't know if it was, you know, environment or genetics, if that's, you know, there's thoughts out there that go against either one of those things, but whatever reason it was, I led down that path of first snorting and then shooting heroin. And at that end of that basically 2-year run, it was dead or in jail, like you said. And my mom was retired Army, active duty, badass, super disciplinarian. We used to catch belts for like discipline when we were kids. She'd say like, go pick your own belt, go pick a belt. And like my mom was into fashion. So we had like little skinny belts all the way up to like really thick belts. And I would pick the thick ones to be like, you know, fuck you. and so,
Yeah.
and so anyway, long story short, the military, I got away. It saved my life, man. Getting out, getting some responsibility, getting some camaraderie, doing well in boot camp, and, you know, just getting out and living that life for a while. But for you kind of had some different iterations when you had kids in the military and all this strain and logistics and all these things. But you got out and you followed down that path of, you know, personal training and really building your business essentially. And then this accident happens. And for those that don't know, not yet, you could tell this story, but this guy is an incredible athlete. Like, and he's overcome. And if you could talk a little bit about this, how that plays into your business, how you've overcome this devastating injury, both mental and physical, into the, you know, part of what you do today is animal flow. And it's like, you're basically like Spider-Man. You can do all these crazy, beautiful moves. It's insane. I love it. Like, you do all these beautiful moves and like full mastery. And I know you probably don't feel this way. You're probably just touching the precipice of mastery, but like in my mind, full mastery of your body and like teaching other people how to find wellness, not only just, you know, through the physical, but the emotional and mental part of this. So can you talk a little bit about that transition for you from being injured to deciding to go out to run your own business to what you do within that business, how you specifically train and help and heal your athletes and continue to be cathartic for you?
Yeah, man. Well, thank you. And yeah, so when I tore my hand open, four flexor tendons, a radial artery, median nerve, it's no joke.
What did it look like?
So
Was it like a shark ripped your hand open kind of thing?
it it literally looked like a shark had like chomped on my hand,
Gosh.
like fully gashed, just stitches everywhere, just super thick. Hand was blown up like a balloon. It looked like a Mickey Mouse glove
Ugh.
with like incisions, and I ended up getting, I think the day after the surgery. So I had to wait like 24 hours to even get surgery. But they were like pulling pieces of granite out of my hand in the downstairs office. So
Damn.
if that gives you any indication on the pain from it, it hurt incredibly. But thank God I severed a nerve, so I didn't feel as much as I should have. But when I went to the hospital, they ended up doing a flexor tendon repair. So they repaired all four. And the day after that, they did the nerve and artery repair. So I had 3 different surgeries in 2 days. Went through, I want to say 3 to 4 months of rehab, passive rehab, until they basically told me, for anyone who could see, I think my palm and my fingers would make like a 90-degree angle. And that's as much as I could close my hand for these 2 fingers, at least my index and my middle finger. And they ended up doing another surgery. So I got a 3rd surgery for a tenolysis, which is basically where they just start stripping out all the scar tissue. And I went back into PT for another 3 months. So we're looking at 7 months rehab now. And instead of active rehabilitation, they did passive rehabilitation. So it really only got me into like where I almost had like a little mini claw, and I still couldn't close my hand fully. I couldn't feel my first 2 fingers. And after that, I just said, screw it. Like I'm going to figure out a way to do it on my own. So throughout this process, this is also when I was going through transformational training and everything else, and kind of humbling my ego and looking at all these different ways, I became more open and receptive to other ways and other methods. And I ended up meeting a chiropractor, while training a client, and she introduced me to him, thank God. And he introduced me to DNS, which is dynamic neuromuscular stabilization, which is essentially how to retrain the brain, how to stabilize, especially through movement, essentially. And once I found this practice, just learning how to load my hand properly and learning how to stabilize my shoulder properly, learning how the nerves work in the body, learning how joints work in the body, and just learning just how the body works in general from a more functional perspective really opened my eyes to other ways that are outside of traditional rehab, because people don't know that these things are available.
Right.
You have an injury and it's go here 12 weeks 3 times a week, and the things end up coming back, and this is how our system is built, unfortunately. And during this process, like doctors told me, they're like, you're not going to get full function of your hand back unless you get surgery and surgery and surgery. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not getting any more surgeries, because number one, I felt broken. I felt like I was useless. Like I had mentioned earlier, I contemplated suicide because I was so attached to like what I could do with my hand and how much it influenced how much I thought about myself. So I just wasn't in a place mentally to really deal with that anymore. And I just got sick of it. So I found DNS. So now I'm one of 2 DNS trainers here in the state of Arizona. The other one's a chiropractor who actually brought me into it. So this is something that I've been specializing with for a while, combined with movement assessments and everything else to help restore neurological function. And throughout this process of learning how to heal myself and everything else, I came across an Instagram video, and it was Mike Fitch, right, the creator of Animal Flow, and I saw the way he moved, and it was beautiful. And when I first saw it, it really brought me back to martial arts and wrestling and all the things from my youth that I really had a passion for, the things that kept me out of trouble. So I started dabbling with it. I started looking it up online. I started doing it on my own, and I started getting really strong. Like I lost a lot of weight. So for people who can visualize, up to my injury, I think my highest, I was up to 253 pounds, whereas now I'm 205 pounds. So I've lost about 50 pounds since then. And I started losing weight, but I was still just as strong. Where I would first start Animal Flow, I could barely hold myself up just because it was body weight training. It was all body weight training and like calisthenic style training. And it was incredibly difficult, just incredibly difficult. So the mental fortitude that it took to just keep doing it over and over and over and over really started to build my resilience mentally. But then I started noticing that I could start closing my hand better. I started being able to feel the ground more, like the feeling in my fingers started coming back because I was actually using my body, you know, because doctors told me, they're like, well, don't aggravate it too much. And if it hurts, don't do it. But in my mind, I was like, well, if it hurts, like I'm just going to modify it. Like that's what common sense told me as a trainer. So that's what I did. And I just started exploring it, man. And, just being able to come out of that injury and being able to defy what doctors tell me and really, I really see that like I do have the power to heal myself. I don't need anybody else to do it for me. I can do it on my own, and that was a huge thing, a breakthrough for me, because I never really felt powerful enough or strong enough to do things on my own. I always thought I needed some type of validation to know if I was right or if I was doing this right or if I was doing this correctly. And throughout my rehabilitation process, I really started feeling empowered with the tools to heal myself. And it keeps coming back to that. And now animal flow is what it's done, through this progression and kind of mirroring what I was saying earlier about how it's getting out of our mind and into our body. Animal flow has now become an outlet for me. And it's almost a mindfulness practice where now it's a chance for me where if I'm in a state of being where I'm very emotional, right? I've actually started using my movement to influence my emotional state and starting to like shift my mindset. So that way I could start working and navigating through my thoughts rather than being in my head. I get into my body, and that's where I start practicing my tempo reflects my tenacity, which is what me and a couple other people are creating in terms of creating a felt experience rather than a head experience, if you want to call it.
Expand on that a little bit. Talk about that.
Yeah. So it's actually myself, Adrian, and Sevi from Fit for Service. And this is kind of how we collaborated and brought this together, where it is a more intuitive state of being in your body. We have all these heart rate monitors and we have these sets and reps and these specifics, seconds for tempo, which I agree with. They serve a purpose in strength and conditioning for sure. But what we don't hear a lot about is how we use movement to as our medicine, and how we use movement to be mindful. And, my belief behind this is me being a little bit more, quote unquote, spiritual, whatever you want to call that or define that as, and diving into yoga and mindfulness practices and breath work and surrender and, just becoming more conscious and aware of how I show up. I've realized that, through a felt experience, we get rid of all the bullshit. We get rid of all the shit that everybody tells us, is normal. And it's an opportunity for us to tune into ourselves and say and ask ourselves, what do I need in this moment? And how can I really dive into that? How can I tap into that rather than always thinking that I have to fix something?
Yep.
But rather I can just be in it and I can express myself through movement and I can create a felt experience to where my body can feel these things moving around rather than me feeling like I have to pull it out with my mind. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned is getting more into my body and out of the regimens and out of the metrics and out of these things to where, asking myself, am I using this to elevate myself or suppress myself? Am I walking into the gym to do damage or am I doing it to heal myself? And if the goal is to damage myself, then quite frankly, I'm wasting my time, because we do need to experience some type of damage in the gym, right? Tearing muscle, build muscle. Cool. Got it. But, does it need to be painful or can we do it in different ways? Can we actually start expressing ourselves in different ways? That's the biggest thing, is just expressing emotion in a world where we're not allowed to express ourselves is fundamentally what I'm starting to teach now.
Man, so it's to me, from a business standpoint, being business minded, you're your best testimonial so far, for your product and for your programming, for your guidance as a coach and as a mentor and as a leader, as a servant leader. You're just going out there and going from being disabled with your hand, essentially. You're not fully able, so part of you is disabled, but you didn't want to believe that. You bucked the system, the rebel that you are, and you decided to do things on your own and give it a shot and like not take the status quo as law. And now you've turned your crippled hand essentially into a fully functional, we could talk about maybe if there's still some pains and stuff like that, but fully functional ability to do some of the most beautiful strength work and mindset work, and like have fully functioning appendages, right? That's what it is. And now your clients see this. And so if your clients come to you, and you had a call with me this morning, and we talked this morning before you jumped on, telling me a client came to you with a lower back injury or an aggravated back, but talk a little bit about how that's played out for you with being your best case study, talking to your clients about having this claw that you mentioned for a hand, and now you're doing what looks like backflips to me. And I know there's names for these things, right? And you could talk about that, but you're basically, like I said, you're like Spider-Man. Like you could do whatever you want with your body, and you do all these beautiful gymnastic and like strength and flexibility type things. Talk a little bit more about that journey specifically, like for you being the role model for that and what your clients have accomplished through this programming.
Yeah, 100%. So, it all starts with assessment. You have to assess, or you're guessing. That has always been my philosophy, my motto, my mantra, my approach. If I'm not assessing you, I don't know what the hell is going on with you. So I'm going to assess as much as I can to look at something in what's considered quote unquote normal, right? And we're going to find what doesn't work, and we're going to make it work good. Because before you start doing animal flow and backflips and all these things that you want to do that I'm doing, like you have to ask yourself, do you meet the prerequisites first? Because it's taken me, 2 years now of consistent work, not only doing animal flow, but doing all the prerequisite work, making sure that I have the proper mobility to do a handstand, to make sure I have the proper mobility to do a scorpion. These things are quite often overlooked, where I tell people, like, just because you see me doing it on Instagram, like, doesn't mean you're able to do it right now.
Yeah.
So if you're not able to do it, chances are you should explore what needs to be done in order to get to that level. And that's where, coming in from an injury, let's use that, right? And assess them. And in no way am I a doctor or a physician. So if there's anything outside of my scope, I am always the first to refer out. I know what I can do. I know what I can't do. But there's always a fine line. Exactly.
Yep.
And there's always a fine line and distinguishment between pain and discomfort. And I do certain tests where, if there is like a pinching sharp pain, like, dude, I can't work with you right now. I want you to go to this person, get this testing done, and make sure that everything is structurally okay before you start doing stuff with me. Yep. Because that's your bench's best interest, not mine. That's the first thing I preface is I'm not a doctor. I'm just really good at moving people around. Just really good at that. And that's what I'm going to do good.
And noble with it too, and honest with your programming and assessments. You don't want to, there's some, Joe Rogan uses a funny term, calls it hucksters, like people who are out there just want to sell stuff and they want to like hit it and quit it, like get their sale done and move on. And, you could be one of these, another guy or girl that's out there just selling their programming, selling your coaching, selling your brand. But you'll look at someone straight up and be like, listen, you're not ready for me yet. And that actually would endear someone versus someone getting injured because of your stuff. And then it would hurt them and look bad for your business. So that's great.
Yeah. I mean, and that's where I'm going to look at their assessment. I'm going to say, okay, well, I mean, if we can distinguish the pain a little bit, if we can look at certain symptoms and stuff like that, that's when then we refer out. But if it's just uncomfortable, if you're just stiff, and if there's pain, is it really physical, right? So I also like kind of tie this in there. And I ask them, and I start looking at metaphysical aspects of pain, just for them to consider, not saying, oh, well, it's this because you have too much on your shoulders. It's because you have too much financial responsibility. It's because your knee pain's coming from your uncertainty. Like I don't sit there and I preach that, but I allow them to consider, like, pain is something that's so complex that nobody in this world can really truly tell you where it's coming from. They can't. It is such a complex science behind it. And there's so many different multifaceted aspects of it. So just letting somebody know, like, your pain isn't just physical. Your emotional issues can reside in your tissues. You can have metaphysical aspects of pain from these certain things. So I try to educate people. The first thing that I do, I assess them on their movement, and I educate them on what doesn't work, quote unquote, properly, what isn't functioning as well as we want it to, but also other things to consider that could be contributing to your pain. So that way, if you have pain, you don't always have to go see a physical therapist or a chiropractor or a doctor. Maybe you need to go see a psychologist. Maybe you need to go see a life coach. Maybe you need to go see an energy healer. You know, there are so many different tools and resources that are available. And I want to make sure that everybody who comes and sees me knows that there are so many other options and resources that whatever calls to them, it's their journey, it's their process, it's their healing. And in no way am I going to say that my way is the best way.
Yep.
If I know that they have as many available resources as possible, I want to give them what they need to live a happier and healthier life. That's first and foremost. You know, but when they do work with me, it's looking and saying, okay, your mobility shit. So let's make sure that we get that down. And I teach them and I give them tools and I teach them the exercises to do on their own. But it's all about, you need to do the work. You know, you can't just walk into some place and expect a magic pill to just fix you up. And you can't just do it one time.
Yep.
Just like it takes about 66 days to build a healthier habit, it takes about 8 to 12 weeks to retrain neurological movement patterns and how the body actually adapts and to see biological change rather than just a simple change. Like, yeah, I might do an exercise with somebody and they're like, oh, my shoulder feels better, but it's going to wait. You might wake up tomorrow and it might come back. Yep. Because it's the brain takes time to register and change just like everything else. So, you know, I do preface with people, like, if you're going to do this work, it's going to take consistent work for about 8 to 12 weeks, you know, and this is going to give you the prerequisites to then allow you to do other things that you want to do in your life. You know, I'm not sitting here telling you that you have to stop doing yoga or you have to stop doing cycling. I don't want you to stop anything you're doing. I just want you to do what you're doing better. Yep. And everything I'm going to teach you is going to allow you to do those things to the fullest of your capacity, to the fullest of your potential. And, you know, whether that be retraining your breathing pattern or looking at retraining how your shoulder works and how your shoulder functions and how you move and just the awareness behind it. Like, are you loading your feet properly? Are you loading your hand properly? You know, it's not so much a physical practice of everything that I'm teaching people, but it's just being mindful and aware of our body. So I teach in 3 different segments. I teach the awareness, which is the assessment, the intention, which is the program or the newly found tools that they're going to start incorporating, and then the integration of how they're going to integrate it into their daily lives, into their daily practice for them to do what they want to do. And that's broken down into 3 phases in which, you know, carries over, you know, 8 to 12 weeks.
So there's so much there, and a lot of what I heard you say and knowing about this from being in Fit for Service, there's a lot of extra additional practices that people can throw into their routines and in their lives to enrich their lives, to gain, you know, anything they're looking to gain in the physical world, the spiritual world, emotional world. And so, you know, I know we both have probably about 10 more minutes left because you have an appointment and I do as well. And so first thing, I definitely want to continue this conversation because there's a lot of things left to unpack. But for the next little bit before we have to jump to our appointments, I want to talk about Fit for Service, how you found that, you know, what you've learned through that. I know the connections you've made through there are invaluable, and like what it's done for you up until this point.
Yeah, man. And Fit for Service, you know, like everybody else who joined it, I found it through Aubrey Marcus. You know, I started listening to his podcast, and what really sparked that for me was the psychedelic integration. Because, you know, back in March, I had a pretty powerful psychedelic experience. Essentially, is my first, you know, real experience, and I ended up smoking DMT.
Was it a plant medicine? What was it?
Yeah, it was DMT.
DMT. Okay. What was that experience like for you? What did you go in? What was the actual experience like? Walk us through, and then like what were some of the downloads you received?
Ooh, yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. The minute I hit it, because we ended up smoking it off a bowl of weed, I was the last one to go, and I'm pretty sure it's about a hero dose. Just
really?
Because, yeah, it was intense. Because I ended up hitting the resin, everything, you know, it was just rough. So the minute I inhaled, just blast off, gone.
Yep.
And I just fell back, man, and it felt as though my like brain was ripping in half, and like my all of reality just disintegrated in front of me. Like I fully believe that I experienced death, and what the most painful possibility of what death could be and what it could look like. And the reason being is because I locked up. I immediately resisted it. I tried to control it, just like I try to control everything else in my life. And going through that process, you know, coming up off the ground, like just completely rising, completely out of body, just completely just disintegrating into darkness. You know, it was terrifying. You know, I thought I had lost everything in that moment. And from that point forward, going through this experience and this journey, I found myself a few minutes in, hearing women's voices telling me to breathe, because I'd forgot to breathe. I was locking up, I was resisting it, I was fighting it, and all I heard was breathe, breathe, breathe. And then I took a deep breath in, and everything just started to settle. And then, I shot up terrified, because I thought like I was waking up in an operating room, because shortly after the breathe, I heard beeping noises, like boop, 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 boop. Like it felt as though I was, getting surgery. I thought I was like in the emergency room, and I was receiving some type of surgery, because the bursa that I had over my T1, T2 is now gone after that moment. So there was a spiritual surgery occurring for sure. And I ended up sitting out of it, and I opened my eyes, and I just saw the most beautiful thing in the world. It was just dark and black, but I would see these orbitals, and I knew there was a nightlight in the room. So I knew where the light was coming from. So I still knew I was here. Like I was still in the world, thank God.
In this realm,
and,
yeah.
Yeah. But I just saw everything that I had seen, that I'd never seen before. And it occurred to me in that moment, like, there's so much more around us than what we truly know. And I thought I knew a lot, but in reality, I know nothing.
Yep.
And seeing the darkness and seeing how deep and vast it was, but seeing these orbitals and all the beauty there, really taught me. And the download I received from that was that there's always beauty within the darkness. You can always find beauty. You can always find peace within your chaos, is what I found. And the experience, I ended up coming back down, went back in, and again, my brain just started ripping apart again. And it just felt like this, just peeling back.
Yep. Shedding a new skin, maybe.
Yeah. So I was shedding, just
Yep.
complete shedding, and for, what we know as like the ego death, right? That is exactly what I experienced. And death was the most accurate description of what was happening. And, out of that experience, I realized like why it was so painful and why it was so terrifying. It was the largest download I've ever received. And it took several months to receive that download, because I ended up losing my relationship of 2 years. Up in that May, we ended up getting back together, and I kept losing it. And it finally set in like November. So it was like a 9-month integration download, because I just didn't know what to do with it. And the download I received was like, if you try to control everything in your life, you will die. You will die. And life means nothing if you try to control everything that happens within it.
Yep.
And that was just a lesson that was taught to me month after month after month after month after month, until I fully accepted it and was like, okay, I get it. Like, I really do get it now. And it was that experience which opened me up to the realm of fit for service. And, and anybody who knows Aubrey Marcus, he's very open about his psychedelic experiences when sitting with plant medicines. And since then, being integrated in the plant medicine community, and educating myself on the benefits of psychedelics and plant medicine, and actually incorporating these things into my life to enhance my growth, to expand my consciousness, has ultimately been huge. And being in a community where we are all like-minded, and being in a community where we can openly discuss these things, and also speak with each other and integrate these things and share these experiences, has been truly beautiful. And it's allowed me to cultivate so many different connections in terms of just being able to be open and honest and vulnerable with what I use and what I experience in my own life. And it's brought great things. Like I said, I've just, working with you on some masculinity movement work, in the potential future is kind of what we've been talking about. And now, working with Adrian and Sevi and working on building this experience for people, has been really, truly amazing to cultivate this work, and seeing how we can be fit for service out in the real world,
Incredible, brother. And there's so much to be continued. I wish we had another hour together. I know that you have a mentor meeting coming up with your mentor, and that's going to be something I want to discuss. I want to continue the conversation of your business. I want to continue the conversation of, your experience with fit for service and plant medicines. There's so much to talk about. There's so much to talk about in our masculinity movement and what that's going to look like and what you're doing with Seb and Adrian. So to be continued. This is part 1 of part 2, I would say, or part 1 of part forever. So, been my pleasure. We're going to put the close out on pause because we're not fully closing out this conversation. So any ways that people want to get in touch with you, connect with you, at least at this time, until we wrap up our conversation in another interview, what's the best way people can find you and follow your work and get plugged into you?
Yeah, so people can find me on my website. It's www.NeuIntention.com. And then they can also just follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn at Nathan Kohlerman.
Easy enough, brother. I love your energy. I love your spirit. I love that you're a badass human being that's humble as they get, but as tough as nails. You're amazing. And whatever I can do to support you along the journey, I will. He is Nathan Kohlerman, and I am Jesse T. Be sure to catch us on next week's episode of The Jesse T. Show.